coming to documentaries from the work that I do on fictional features, I'm struck by how hard it is to generalize about documentaries, which can be as various in form and intention as our experience in the world. If documentaries don't sell tickets the way fictional features do, it's because viewers come to watch films because they want to be moved somehow, to have an emotional experience. And they feel assured that the fictional film will give them their money's worth, or their time's worth, no matter how hackneyed the devices are through which it does so, no matter if they wake up the next morning feeling used and dirty and perhaps infected by a social disease like sexism or racial prejudice. Because documentaries are much more open and unpredictable in form, they give no such assurance. I'm not suggesting that documentarians try to beat fiction at its own game by by confining themselves to subjects that lend themselves to tear-jerking. We're not signing up to be emotionally manipulated when we see a documentary. We're looking to find something new to care about, to have an experience that's going to enlarge and change us in some ways. The storyline can't be handled with too much care, because that is where the fusion of thought and feeling is designed. The storyline is the armature for the temporary fusion of observant filmmaker, multifarious world, and viewer. In this respect, fiction and non-fictional films are no different. Part 2, Nigerian filmmaking. For the last 2 years, IREP's theme was archiving Africa. In 2017, this meant issues of Africa's history on film. How has it been captured? Who made it? Where is it now? Who owns it or controls it? Is it being preserved for the future? In 2018, archiving Africa meant recording the present and looking to the future. I want to pick up on the staggering contrast that emerges from these backward and forward glances, from the struggle for self-representation to the current problem of making one's way through the digital clutter. 30 years ago, 2/3 of the population of Africa had not been born. Young people are native citizens of a global glut of images and scarcely imagine the revolution in African audiovisual media, one of the most dramatic episodes in the history of the world's cultures. 30 years ago, discussions of African cinema began and ended with laments that African films were almost never seen by Africans in Africa. Up to 2006, all of sub-Saharan Africa had produced about 500 celluloid feature films. Fewer films than Nigeria is going to produce during the rainy season that's beginning. And there was almost no way to see these films outside of film festivals, a few art house cinemas in the global north, and some minor non-commercial distribution circuits. Although Africa had been integrated into the international circulation of moving pictures almost from the moment of cinema's invention, cinema's heavy apparatus depended on the whole infrastructure of the Industrial Revolution, and this was firmly under colonial or neo-colonial control. Under colonialism, at first feature films were imported for the amusement of the colonizers, and newsreels were imported to keep them integrated into the larger world, while exoticizing images of the natives were being filmed. A little later, feature films served as attractions to vehicularize the documentaries of the colonial film units, meant to improve the natives in various ways, teach them hygiene or something. What the natives made of these films is another story, but the apparatus of cinema was out of their hands. Brian Larkin has written about how the earnest purposes of modernization and nation building passed from the colonial film units to the Nigerian Television Authority, and so into Nigerian film culture. Eventually, cinema became an urban commercial business in the mid-range of the economy, run as so many things in that range were by Lebanese and Indians. To reference Brian's work again, to go to the cinema was to step into an American or an Indian reality, far from that of Nigeria, to experience translocality in an alienating form, but it also gave Africans space for dreaming and for selective cultural appropriations. In post-colonial Africa, Nigeria was subjected to the same radically unequal general conditions as the rest of the continent when it came to media, but in 3 separate phases, it met those conditions with enormously creative, confident, and consequential responses. Responses quite unlike anything else on the continent in scale and sometimes in kind. The first of these phases was to initiate broadcast television in 1959 and to rapidly construct a robust national television apparatus. Awam Ankpa once said to me in conversation that the NTA was maybe the most important institution in creating the Nigerian nation, in creating a sense of national identity in the congeries of ethnic groups that the British had thrown together. This was a very striking thing to say, and it might be true. Anyway, I sort of adopted the proposition and keep repeating it, partly in the hope that somebody will be moved to argue the point and to substantiate the point. There hasn't been a tiny fraction of the work by academics or other cultural commentators on Nigerian television that I'm convinced that it deserves and needs. I like to quote an essay by Segun Olushola. If you don't know who that is, that illustrates the problem that I'm talking about here. In which he points out that the world takes as normal a situation in which television is born after at least half a century of cinema in various countries around the world, and in most cases after a very long, maybe centuries or even millennia long tradition of stage drama, literary drama. Olushola points out in Nigeria, it didn't happen like that. Television came before cinema, and even what we think of as the origins of Nigerian drama, modern drama, either the literary drama or the work of the Yoruba Traveling Theater, was really bound up with things that were happening in the Ibadan studios of WNTV in the early 1960s, when people like Baba Sala and Duro Ladipo were beginning their careers in large part on TV, not on this stage. Then they went on stage after TV. And Wole Soyinka was coming around and writing for television serials and so on. The celluloid film phase of the Yoruba Traveling Theater tradition excuse me, is the second of the 3 signal contributions Nigeria has made to African media. Traveling theater artistes were responsible for about 100 of those 500 films that Africa produced on celluloid. Unlike almost all the rest, their films did not depend on support from African governments, the French official cultural apparatus, or other foreign governments or NGOs. They showed that an African popular audience could sponsor the film culture that it wanted through the modalities of the informal sector. The third phase, of course, is Nollywood, which built on this model provided by the Yoruba Traveling Theater. From Lagos to Enugu, from Freetown to Kinshasa, from Cape Town to Dar es Salaam, from Los Angeles and the Bronx to Haiti, Nollywood definitively established that the production of images of Africa was now firmly in African hands. Nollywood's own structures have never had a place for documentaries, but it created an enormous filmmaking capacity. And perhaps most crucially, created a sense of ownership and a possibility when it comes to filmmaking. Now I'm going to say the thing that I always say when somebody gives me a microphone in this country. which is that the videotape, the celluloid, the optical discs that carry this extremely important and actually glorious heritage are all decaying in tropical heat. Or most of them are lost. When you're talking about the television heritage and the celluloid film heritage, most of that stuff appears to be gone forever. Nobody's ever even carried out a comprehensive damage assessment to know what might be left somewhere. Virtually nothing's being done to rescue them. In 10 years, it's going to be virtually impossible to piece together anything like an adequate history. It's not impossible now, and since I'm looking at a room full of